thank you. I don't think I can quite live up to that introduction, but I'll see what I can do. I don't have a great poem for you, but I'll build on the H1N1 by mentioning that the prisoners at Guantanamo are in line to get the vaccine. So don't worry, they'll get it, even though you won't. As the priorities of the people who are running our government and want to run our healthcare, just to give you some idea. You know, I think that the way we have to look at this whole debate is to look at what they want, what their intentions are, because the details and the specifics are changing every single day. They'll claim to be for something else. They'll try to take the most egregious stuff out every time we point to it. But at the end of the day, what the left in this country wants is they want us to be like Europe. They want us to be like the rest of the world. And in healthcare, that means they want a Washington takeover. They want government to be in charge of who gets what kind of healthcare, of how the priorities are set, of what treatments are made available when, and of how it's all paid for. This is what they believe in. They believe that we are barbaric, that we're not like Europe in this regard, that we believe in some semi-market system, and clearly it's about half government now, maybe more. But that's not good enough for them. They want a total Washington takeover, and you need to look at it from that prism because they've fallen back a couple times in terms of how to accomplish that goal. A couple of years ago, President Obama was a US Senator, and he said, yeah, of course I want a single-payer healthcare system like Canada. There's video all over YouTube. Pretty clearly an advocate of a total government takeover at that time. Well, that was not politically tenable. Obviously, it wasn't even politically tenable for Hillary, who had this mangled managed competition plan back in the 90s, you may recall. So, on the campaign trail for president, both Obama and Clinton adopted a new plan from a professor at Yale named Jacob Hacker called the public option. And Hacker was very open about the way this was supposed to work. The goal was what it had always been, total Washington takeover, Canadian or European-style single-payer system. But what Professor Hacker said is, we will create the choice for people. We'll say, create this public option. People will choose whether they want that or private insurance. And over time, everyone will end up in the public insurance plan, and they will have chosen it, so we'll have solved the political problem. Everyone will be happy with where they end up. Now, you'll notice the trick to this is you have to get everyone to choose it, which would be pretty difficult to do unless you rigged it, which of course they would. They would make sure that the public option is, of course, tax exempt, is exempt from all kinds of regulations, and has subsidies from the taxpayer, if not explicit in the form of appropriations, implicit the way Fannie and Freddie had, which is everyone knows it'll never go out of business. They know it'll be bailed out if it has to be, so it can borrow at treasury rates, undercut everyone else, run them out of business. The same thing we saw in the secondary market for mortgages, really. And so that's how that trick works. And Jacob Hacker, there's a great video of this on YouTube. Type in public plan deception if you want to see it. He said it's not a Trojan horse for single payer, it's right here. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. This is how it works. You know, what's the problem? This is how we're going to do it. That became widely known earlier this year, and it looked like they were going to have to pull that out. And, you know, they were sort of figuring, how can we accomplish the same goal without this? And they intended to do it through mandates and subsidies. And the idea was, we will require every person in the country to buy health insurance. We will require every employer in the country to provide health insurance. And we, Washington politicians and bureaucrats who maybe delegated some of this power, will decide what the definition of health insurance is. And we'll decide what everyone's plan that we've required you to buy will cover, what it will exclude, what it will charge, and so on and so forth, where it'll technically be private, but they'll have every bit as much control as they would have under the public plan or the direct single payer. And then they actually kind of brought the public option back in, and now it's in. Now it's in the bills on both the House and the Senate side, so they're back to sort of the two-step plan instead of the three-step plan. The goal here, what they want to accomplish, is a Washington takeover of our health care, and that is why the details can keep changing, but we cannot stop fighting this. And most importantly, we have a very, very important vote coming up in just a few days. The United States Senate, probably Saturday, is going to vote on a procedural vote. It's called cloture on the motion to proceed. Cloture on the motion to proceed. You should write that down, because if you do put in calls, you need to say that so they know which vote you're talking about. Cloture on the motion to proceed is a 60-vote vote. They will need 60 out of 100 U.S. senators to start the debate. And once that debate starts, nobody knows what happens. They could cut deals, they could have amendments, they could end up doing whatever they need to do to get it to pass. So we need to prevent them from ever even starting that debate, because if we know what they want to accomplish, there is no good outcome possible from this debate. And so I have a homework assignment for all of you. All of you, this is not as easy as it might be in some states, because you can call your senators. I encourage you to do that, but that's not the assignment, because I'm sorry, you're not going to convince your senators. You need to think of someone you know in one of a handful of states. Virginia for Mark Warner, Arkansas for Blanche Lincoln, Nebraska for Ben Nelson, North Dakota for both Senators Conrad and Dorgan, Connecticut for Joe Lieberman, Indiana for Evan Bayh. You need to think of one person or more, but I would ask each of you to think of at least one person that you know in one of those states. Call them, ask them to call their senators, who I think can be influenced on this, and tell them to vote no on cloture on the motion to proceed. That vote is expected Saturday. It is not going to be a given that they will win on this. In the House of Representatives, the Democrats have an 80-seat majority, and they passed this by 5 votes. And they were only able to pass it by 5 votes by making a deal on the abortion issue to get them past the finish line. That's how close this was. If they hadn't been able to get that deal, they wouldn't have been able to pass it in the House. It is not a given that they will even get this first vote to start the debate in the Senate, and we can't let them off the hook. Now, if we lose on Saturday, of course we shouldn't give up. There are going to be a few other votes. But right now, for the next couple of days, that is what we need to focus on. Now, what are some of the specifics in the House bill? I can't talk about the Senate bill, because even though they're voting Saturday, it's still secret. We're supposedly going to see it tomorrow, but that'll tell you something about this. Harry Reid has been keeping that secret for 6 weeks, going back and forth with the Congressional Budget Office trying to get a favorable budget score, which is all a fiction anyway. We know it'll cost many times what they claim it will, but they're still keeping that secret. But the House bill, why you should be extremely concerned about it. First of all, this is a devastating economic blow to an economy that cannot afford it. We have 10.2% unemployment presently in this country. What is the only sector that's performed well over the past 2 years that we've been in recession? Healthcare. Added 597,000 new jobs in the past 2 years. They're going to destroy that sector outright. They're going to add huge new burdens to small businesses. 5.4% of adjusted gross income for so-called high-income earners, which is couples over $1 million, individuals over $500,000. Almost everyone in that income category owns a small business. That's how they're making that money on their taxes. That's a huge impact on business. We've got an 8% payroll tax that says if you don't offer insurance that meets all these new standards that we're requiring, which are going to be very, very expensive, you have to pay 8% of your payroll as a new payroll tax. That also is economically devastating, especially for the medium-sized businesses that don't get the phase-in. They have a bit of a phase-in range for the very small businesses, but once you hit that phase-out amount, which is around $700,000, 8% of your payroll in this new tax. And of course, it's also going to add to borrowing, no matter what they say with these CBO scores. I think we all know, and the Chinese even told us, they said, hey, how are you going to pay for this? We don't want to keep buying all your bonds forever. Do you really think you can have this? When you're getting lectured about fiscal responsibility by the communist Chinese, you've got a problem as a country in where you're going fiscally. So the fiscal side is an absolute disaster. And to